What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for joining the Unlearn the Lies About Mental Health podcast. You are tuned into episode 37. I am your host, Abraham Scully, and this is the podcast for young adults and leaders in education wanting to learn how to create safe spaces for honest dialogue about mental health. So I'm excited because we have a really important conversation, but we have an even more special guest. And I'm excited to introduce our listeners to this guest and for you to hear her story and her expertise, what she's up to, and how she's supporting student mental health. Before we dive into that, I do want to share a statistic that came from a report that was published in 2019. It's by JAMA Pediatrics. It says, many mental health conditions first appear in youth and young adults, with 50% of all conditions beginning by age 14 and 75% by age 24. So in today's conversation, we are going to be discussing mental health in schools and how can we bring the conversation to the forefront? How can we prioritize this conversation and ensure that we are supporting the students that we serve and support? Without further ado, I want to introduce to you all our guest today, Emily Ryan. How is it going?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me, Abraham. How are you?
I'm well, and I'm more excited now that we're having this conversation. I know how awesome you are, but I'm interested in introducing everyone to how awesome you are as well. And then absolutely diving into some practical strategies and tools that listeners can utilize when it comes to supporting student mental health. So if you're cool with it, I'd love to dive right into your story. And if you can just give us some background as to how you got to where you are today.
Thank you. Let's see here. This is my 14th year as a high school counselor. Prior to that, I worked at the YMCA. I did a lot of urban management of the programs after school at the YMCA all throughout the greater Cleveland area, specifically in Bedford, Ohio, which is one of the suburbs of Cleveland. Even prior to that, my own experiences and why I got into the field that I'm in is as a teenager, I struggled myself with mental health. But back in the late 90s and early 2000s, it really wasn't something that we really talked about. I mean, we knew that there was some stuff, right? But you really didn't necessarily talk as openly as we do now. And I myself struggled a lot in high school. And that really was, seen in my academics. And I actually ended up getting kicked out of one of my high schools. And I was really at a low point. I was only 16 years old and I was on the verge of dropping out. And my mom, who is in a tremendous support system to me, she's a single mom. She raised three of us on her own.
Mm,
She dragged my butt up to the local public school, and I met a woman who changed my life. Her name is Mrs. Sue King. She is now retired, but she was a school counselor herself. Now, during that time in the early 2000s, they were called guidance counselors. That term and position has changed and developed and evolved as it should have. But she changed my world. She actually took the time to listen to me and get to know me. And she understood that what I was dealing with wasn't just a kid who didn't care about school or a kid who, was choosing to fail. She understood and took the time to realize that it was deeper than that. She got me involved in a lot of really great things that spoke to me, things like being on stage and show choir. And she got me hooked up with AP Psych, which is a class that really opened a lot of doors for me. And from that point, I knew that I was going to be able to go to college. And, my interest was then piqued with the psychology route of things. So I studied psychology at the University of Akron for 4 years, got my undergrad. I went full time. I worked full time. That was when I started working at the YMCA as like a camp counselor. And then I really started delving in more and became coordinators for their after school program. And then I was, determined to continue on this process of working with students. And I went right into my master's degree for school counseling. I also went for my dual license in mental health as well, to be a private counselor. I'm an internship away. I had some kids. I had 2 children that I kind of stopped and said, okay, I'm going to focus on having my children and working through my career. But I'm going to do that internship. I'm hoping in the spring. So that's a little bit about me.
I love it. And all throughout your story and experience, I hear that there's a strong pull and passion toward, just the youth that you serve. And
Mhm.
I'm sure like over the years, because you've been in it for a while, like over a decade, right?
Yeah.
Doing this type of work. I'm curious to know, have you seen a change or a difference in what students were dealing with, I don't know, let's say 5 years ago versus some of the challenges that students are having now? And if you have recognized some of those differences, what are some of those things that have changed over the last maybe 5 years or so?
Absolutely. Obviously you have the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
That's huge. But even prior to the pandemic, you had the advancement of social media, which can be a great thing and a really not so great thing. You've also had more students that are comfortable with talking about gender identity,
Hmm.
things, and all of that comes with so much. Um, can come with so much stressors and anxieties. So you have a combination of, things happening very fast for students, faster than they ever were for you and myself.
Hmm.
You have students that are, they leave school, but they don't really leave behind some of the issues that they are facing maybe with their peers because it's on social media. You have students that know that they can be maybe more open about how they feel about their identity, but they don't necessarily have the support systems to talk through that. And then you have the pandemic, right? And that in and of itself is a humongous issue that our youth and obviously our whole society is facing, but our youth is going to be dealing with that for a while. You had the heart of it when we were deep entrenched into it, and now we have the aftermath of what that looks like. Um, and I think we're all still trying to figure that part out.
Yeah, 100%. And it makes me think too, because yes, like you mentioned, there was while we're going through it and then the aftermath. So it's like, so how do we equip ourselves or support students with not only what's going on currently, but what they're
Mhm.
going to have to deal with as a result of what they've gone through? And so from that same article, I saw another statistic that says 1 in 6 youth have a mental health condition like anxiety or depression, but only half receive any mental health services. And that's very interesting to me because I think youth and young adults, like you've mentioned, they are more likely to have the conversation and they're more likely to express what's happening, versus 5 years ago, or how the conversation was back then.
Mhm.
But yet still there's still a group of youth who are not utilizing the support that is accessible to them. And I know that there are probably a ton of barriers that exist. um,
Mhm.
are there any barriers that stand out to you as a counselor, and kind of what you're hearing and seeing? And if there are, like, if I'd love for you to share some of those barriers and see how we can bring light to that.
Absolutely. There are definitely barriers, and they're glaringly obvious whenever you look at any school system. You can have the greatest of school systems, the wealthiest of districts, all of that. You're going to have the barrier of the support staff themselves. So I work in a wonderful district. I have had the blessings of working in wonderful districts, and it's still not enough. I'm one counselor to maybe 350 students. That's a lot. And same with my colleagues. We need more mental health focused practitioners in schools. I mean,
Mm,
bottom line. And honestly, without trying to get too political, I think that has to happen at a federal level. It can't just like we have to have buy-in from our politicians that see the need for mental health in schools. School is, we think about communities and you think about, where a lot of kids get their meals from,
mhm,
sometimes their warmth from for the day, their shelter. It's a school. There is that we are the heart of communities. And I
mm.
feel like it really has to come from the top up, that buy-in. So you have these people who are on the ground, like myself, and social workers or any private counselors that come into buildings, and it's still not enough. I've thought about that in my 14 years of working as a high school counselor, of all the kids that I haven't been able to reach. And I know that other counselors feel that way too. So I really think it comes down to um, we need more buy-in.
You said something powerful. I don't even know if you caught it, but you said schools are the heart of the community. And it reminds me of this quote. I don't remember where it comes from, but it says something like it takes a village. And how does it go? Do you remember? It takes a village to raise a,
It does. It takes a
yeah,
village to
something
raise
like
just
that.
one child,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
I believe that as a mother, as a biological mother, and when I view, like, my students, they are my students.
Mm,
They are my responsibility to help and lead and guide to the point that they want to, right? Not everybody wants me to be as involved, and that's okay. I meet my students where they're at. I meet my families where they're at. But I expect for my own children, that if they go to school, they're having a hard day, they can go to their school nurse, they can go to their school counselor, they can go to their teachers, and their teachers are prepared to be empathetic towards them and welcoming and supportive. And I feel confident in my school systems, in my community that I live in, that that will happen. But I put my trust, in the professionals that they will do that. But I also want that for my kids. I want them to experience that village so that they in turn can give back to their communities.
I love that. And kind of going back to the barriers. So you mentioned school staff not having enough support to support the students.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that we're seeing a lot of is there's still a lot of stigma when it comes to seeking support. And even though the conversation has changed tremendously, there is still for, specific groups of students where they're saying, I don't think people like me access that kind of support, or my family wouldn't be okay with me going to a school counselor. So there are different barriers, right? So,
Yeah.
and it depends on the student and their background, their
Mhm.
exposure to this type of education, their awareness of mental health. And I think I already know your answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway, and I'd love for you to kind of expound on it. Should schools prioritize mental health education and awareness, and why, if you think that should be a priority for schools?
Yes, yes, yes. So going back to even my own story when I first introduced myself, you know, and I don't know if I was painting a clear enough picture for everybody, but I was a kid who was struggling mentally. I had tons of anxiety, bouts of depression, and I wasn't doing well academically because I wasn't focused on that. I was focused on, oh my gosh, my heart is beating out of my chest. I can't breathe. I don't want to be here. All sorts of other things. The stories that I hear from my students who are struggling academically are incredibly similar to that. And they all have their reasons. We cannot expect our students to work towards their academic goals if they are not mentally well. It's the same situation for adults, except you're dealing with kids who don't necessarily have the skills to cope with those things. And I'm not saying that adults do either, but for the majority, the kids don't have that. So it is incredibly important to focus on mental wellness for our students in order for them to be academically successful.
And what does that look like, especially for you? Because I know you well enough to know that you are boots on the ground, very creative in your approach to prioritizing student wellness and overall
Mm-hmm.
well-being. And I've heard of you doing some amazing things. I've been a part of a few amazing things, and it's really awesome to see your passion, your commitment, and your resilience to making sure you are creating these spaces. So like, what does some of that look like when it comes to prioritizing this on campuses, and what are some ways that you've done it?
So first off, you have to provide an open space for kids, whether that's, that's physically, that's all of it, right? So putting yourself out there, number one, is huge. So making sure that kids know how to contact you in the way that they are comfortable contacting you. So that's on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram, email. I have a Google Classroom, um, all of those. Because a lot of times kids will feel, in this current generation, they feel more comfortable sending me an email and saying, "Hey, Mrs. Ryan, I need to chat with you," instead of coming into the office and, "Oh my God, is everybody looking at me?" Which, by the way, in my office with my colleagues, the other counselors I work with, oh, they are absolutely wonderful. And we work so collaboratively and as a team. But we've created that space for them. We have, when you first walk into our counseling office, we have a whole room that is very private. We can still see the kids so that we can monitor them, but it is a whole calming sensory area for them. Bean bags, lighting, the whole Apple TV with the cool music and sounds, tons of fidget stuff, journals, all of that. And that's after they've touched base with a counselor. Maybe they just need to de-stress and decompress. So having those spaces within your school there where kids know that they are safe and they can come to that. Also, like you mentioned, getting yourself out there. I'm in the classrooms as much as I can. I know that I'm also up against, graduation requirements, and social emotional learning is yet to be a graduation requirement. It's coming. It's coming. I'm telling y'all it's coming, but it's not there yet. So, I have to make sure that I'm being cognizant of the teacher's time. But I also have buy-in from my colleagues, and they know how important social emotional learning is. So I get into the classroom, I help kids like deal and help with figuring out where are my supports? How do I cope with, the anxieties of, okay, I've got big tests coming up. But I'm also an athlete, or I'm working a job. How do I time manage that, all of that together? I also am the staff that oversees Active Minds, which is a phenomenal program. And it is a national program. And I've also collaborated with a local college, Kent State University. We are like this right now together with Kent State University. In fact, I have their shirt on right now. It says, "Let's talk mental health. It's okay to not be okay." And I took all of my Active Mind students out there last spring, and we talked with the college kids on campus on not just what students can do in high school to improve their mental health and recognize things, but also when they make that step to college, where can they find their supports? Where can they go to, if they're struggling with something? Is there an on-site counseling center that they could go to? So also bringing in speakers like yourself through Active Minds. Right now, I'm working with my leadership team before school starts for Active Minds to go through all of our calendar of events. Every single month, we do something that's whole wide, the whole school wide, that impacts everybody in the building, that is related to mental health awareness. And not just every month, but we do something every single day. So we do something called the Bright Side, and that's every single day affirmations on the PA. That's how we start our whole school day. On Wednesdays, I get on my email, and whatever I'm feeling like the theme is, or whatever the energy is going on in the school, or just, stuff that's happening, I do a Wellness Wednesday for my whole building. And I just send out an email of just some things to think about, and things that they could resources that they could either take it or leave it. And then obviously my individual sessions when I have kids come in to see me.
Yeah. And before we started recording, you mentioned briefly about the social emotional camp. So you got to tell us
Thank you.
what is
It was
that.
like, I feel like
There's so
there's so
many
much
things. It's
more.
like, how do you keep up, right?
Yeah, with myself.
That's why I love Emily so much. She is amazing. All of what she's doing. So tell us about the social emotional camps that you recently
Yes, yes.
facilitated. What is it?
Yep.
How did you come about,
Mhm.
actually executing on that?
Yeah.
And what was the feedback from that?
Yes. So social emotional wellness camp started last summer. So my colleagues in the district, we are small but mighty. There are two elementary school counselors, and there's two at the middle school, and there's three at the high school. And we all realize that, the need is so strong. And this was last summer. So this was even in the thick and the heart of what was going on with COVID, the masks and no masks, all this other stuff, and just being, kids being ill and quarantined and all sorts of things. So we knew that students needed social emotional wellness and learning and support, not just throughout the school year. We really wanted to hone in on our students who really needed it, especially in the summer, because not everybody goes home to really great summer breaks. Not everybody goes home and they're vacationing, or they're this or they're that. And to recognize that is huge. Recognize your student needs is huge. So we worked with our administration, and we developed a plan and said, here is our idea about, having the little ones work with each other, and then having the middle and the high school work with each other as well. And we developed different camp themes throughout the week, or throughout the weeks of summer. So every Wednesday in the summer, and this was last summer and then this summer, and I'm hoping the summers, will be like this, moving forward. But we had a theme for that day. So we worked with the kids for maybe like 3 or 4 hours a day. We would provide them snacks. We provided them like their own little like support resource bags that had water bottles in there, journals in there, fidgets in there, putty, all sorts of things to kind of get them hyped and excited and involved. But every week we had themes such as we went out to a local nature preserve that is actually run by the University of Akron biologists. And they got to talk to the biologists and go bird watching and hiking. That is a really great way for people to de-stress, is to get outside and to get moving. And that was just one of the ways that I wanted to show our students that, get outside, put the video games down and go explore nature and get some fresh air. Another camp that we had, we went out to a local equestrian farm, and they actually have therapists that are equestrian therapists. So they are mental health practitioners that work with a lot of people with trauma. And horses are incredible animals when it comes to emotions. And our kids got to groom the horses, paint the horses. Yes, paint the horses. We got to do like a whole lot of different activities with the mental health therapists that were there. Another activity that we did was we brought in a therapy dog. Like I said, I can't speak more highly of trying to involve more animals. I know there's allergies and all sorts of things, whatever, but another thing that I do is throughout the school year is I bring in one of our parents, and you would be surprised in your district how many parents either are affiliated with some sort of pet therapy, and they can actually bring in their family dog, and any kid or staff who wants to come up and hang out with the dog, they can. But we did a whole session on that. We did a whole nother session with our SRO, our school resource officer, Officer Scott Dressler, who is incredible, who our kids also lean on a lot during a lot of times of need. And we brought him in, and he talked about safety and security, because a lot of times when you're dealing with mental health issues, you don't feel very safe. And talking through those things and hearing, what you can do to keep yourself safe also does help. So that's just a little snapshot as to what we did in
I
the
love
summer.
it. Yeah,
Um,
it's amazing, and it sounds like you were able to get a lot of support and buy-in from almost everyone, right? Everyone came together and said, I love this. I see value in this. Let's work together to make it happen. What strategies or tips would you provide to staff who are in the position of wanting to support, but they don't
mhm.
necessarily have that, administrators who are on board with this? Is there anything maybe you've experienced or anything you can share as to how to get the support from administrators? Because obviously, you need resources to make these things happen. So
Yeah.
anything you can share on that?
Don't give up. Number one, don't give up. Keep pushing along. Continue to build the relationship with your administration, the Board of Education, the board members, the community are vital to moving any programming forward with anything. It hasn't come easy, there has to be that buy-in. And when I think about, generational differences, like I even mentioned, my generation, so I'm in my late 30s, my generation, like I said, we didn't really even talk about that. So the folks that I work with are even in older generations as me. So it can be very uncomfortable for people, to talk about these things and say, "Oh, well, shouldn't that really just happen in the homes?" Okay, that's cool, but is it? And should it just be in the homes? And I am very respectful to other people's wishes and belief systems and all of that. However, having that whole child's best interest at heart is incredibly important. And that's what needs to happen for sure in the school system. So, what I have done in every single year, I do it. I present to the Board of Education. I go up to the board meetings. I present what I'm doing as a school counselor. Myself and other colleagues do it. I don't do it alone. Don't ever, ever be alone in this. Find those colleagues that have the same message as you. Find those colleagues that have that same passion as you and work together on that. Go to presentations, go to board meetings, go to community events, go to the sporting events, put on events. I put on a whole activities and wellness fair last spring for the whole community, and I invited everybody. I invited the PTA, talk to the PTA presidents, talk to the school foundation presidents if you guys have one, go to the meetings. I know it takes time, but this is how things get started. I often feel like I am, very much like just starting off, with all of these things. And I'm hoping that towards the end of my career, whenever that is, that this won't even be a thing. It'll just be
Yeah,
like, okay, it's just part of our curriculum. So I just encourage people to not give up, number one, and keep putting yourself out there.
I love it. That's very encouraging. And I think as, you know, um, staff are listening to this, and they see what can happen as a result of that persistence, you also learn a lot in terms of attending these presentations, these meetings. You learn what their ultimate goal is, and then
Mhm.
you find how your initiative or programming fits into that goal, so that ultimately it's about speaking in a language they understand, and
Yes.
being able to paint the picture. um,
Mhm.
so I love that you share that. I got a lot of questions, and I know we don't have that much time, but I do want to touch on a few points. So one being, there are many teachers, staff members who feel ill-equipped to support a student that they can see is struggling.
Mhm.
And we hear that concern a lot of times, whereas, I'm not the counselor, I'm not the therapist, I don't know what to do. And so oftentimes I don't do anything.
Right.
Share with the listeners, what are some signs that they can look out for to identify if a student needs that
Mm.
support? And then what can they do, even if they're not the expert,
Right.
to support that student?
Absolutely. I mean, most of these things are incredible. Like sometimes, for me, I would think that they would be obvious, but sometimes they're not. Especially if you see a kid, the attendance is a huge thing. Attendance, when I look at myself and my other colleagues, we pull up reports. And I'm not a data person, but you really have to be in this job. You show me data, and I'm like, oh, more, more numbers, but they're actually really important. You have to look at the data. You should look at student attendance. If you start seeing a decline in attendance, that's a huge deal. Why? What's going on? Obviously grades, right? Grades are, you're going to get all sorts of kids that are just like school's not for me, but I disagree. School's for everybody. It should be for everybody. So, it just we just have to find that flow for that student. So attendance is big. If grades are slipping, you got to look to see if that kid is, withdrawn. Sometimes kids are just shy, and that's okay. But every single one of us, it has the capability to be empathetic towards other people. And I think sometimes people, especially like in the teaching field, you're already burned out. You're trying to do all these tests, you're trying to do all this stuff, you're trying to teach all these things, but you still are a human being, and you can still tap into your empathy and your compassion. And if you're getting that feeling that something's not right, going on with that student, do something, say something. And if you are uncomfortable, talking to that student on your own, then yeah, definitely utilize the counseling staff. I mean, that's what we're there for. Now, my counseling staff, we do get up in front of our teaching staff, at all of our staff meetings, and we talk through some things with them and some tips and resources for them. But sometimes these conversations can be really challenging for people to have, especially if they're going through their own things themselves. And I will say this: educators are the worst at taking care of themselves. So for the past few years, I don't know if you feel this way too, Abraham, but like that whole self-care thing, I'm like, last year, if I heard self-care one more time, I was going to scream, because I'm like, when do I got time for that? Like, this self-care stuff is so cool, right? When do I got
Mm-hmm.
time for that? So, you literally sometimes, in order to do that self-care, which is so important so that you can be there for your students, literally sometimes you have to plan out your whole entire day. And even if it involves putting that like 1 hour in for yourself, or half hour, whatever, that's what you got to do. And I apologize, I went off a little tangent
No,
there.
no, I love it. You answered it very well. And I want you to go a little bit deeper, because you said empathy. And I
Mm,
think I think that is such a skill and such a powerful tool when it comes to connection. And I don't know, I mean, my personal experience with mental
yes.
health challenges, and with depression. And, listeners of the show have heard my story, and you've shared your story as well. And I think because we have that personal experience, it's almost like we have
Mhm.
this sixth sense of when
Yes.
something is off, or when an individual needs that support. And it kind of, that empathy allows us to see it and then say something.
Mhm.
I'm curious though, number one, what are some of the things that someone can do and say, like specifically if they see a student in need of support?
Well, honestly, like, building those relationships to begin with from day one are incredibly important, for a teacher. When I talk with my students and they're either saying really good things about a teacher or complaining about them, the number one thing that comes up is relationship, how they feel about that teacher. It has nothing to do with the actual subject. It is always comes down to the way they feel and how that person or teacher has made them feel about something. And then after that, then we start talking about how the instruction is. Are they understanding the material? But it's always about how that teacher is making them feel. So even though it's hard because you're in a classroom sometimes, with our class sizes these days, sometimes you're in a classroom with 30 kids. And I'm sure in other school districts, it could be even higher than that. Trying to get an individual relationship with each student, which can be very hard. We've all seen those videos of the teachers when each kid's walking in, they each have like their own little handshake or whatever, even something like that, which may take away from learning time, curriculum time. Oh, well, remember what I said, that kid goes ultimately to how that teacher is making them feel. So if a teacher is seeing that a student is struggling in their class and they're trying to open up that conversation, honestly, nobody wants to be called out in class, right? First and foremost. So don't do that, teaching 101, right? Do it in a setting where, not a lot of folks are around. There's not a big audience, that sort of thing. Have that one-on-one conversation. Look that kid in the eye. Do not be distracted by your phone, by your computer, by anything, because that is a huge thing when communication these days is, oh, hey, I'm going to have a conversation with you, but I'm going to finish up this email and look at my phone at the same time, right? No, have that one-on-one conversation, look the kid in the eye and say, hey, how you doing? That goes a long way. It really, really does. And if you know that kid's lying to you and they're really not doing well, that's when you take it a step further. And I shouldn't say always, but hopefully always get that follow-up email like, hey, I did check in with so-and-so, but I still didn't get the right feelings from them. Can you follow up with them?
I love it. I've seen you in action with your students, and the amount of love and respect that they have for the one and only Mrs. Ryan was so amazing to watch, right?
Thank you.
And I think not only is there a gap when it comes to parents connecting with their child, but also there is a disconnect many times with teachers and staff connecting with students. I'd love
Yeah.
for you to share any stories that you have where, I mean, now you do it effortlessly when it comes to connecting with students and they feel that connection and they want to be around you. They want to talk to you. Do you have any stories where that wasn't the case, where you tried to connect with one student and for whatever reason, it just didn't work? Any of those?
Oh, yeah.
Share
Oh,
with
yeah.
us.
Oh, yeah. One young man comes to mind right now as I'm sitting here, and there are so many other stories because I've worked with thousands of kids, thousands, um, and so this young man, it was my first year at my current district, and honestly, it was really hard for me. I went from a district that was a little bit more urban, a little bit more what people would call rough around the edges. And I got to know those kids and their families so well. And I had been there for 10 years and it was a really hard transition for me. So I myself, when I met this young man who was in the principal's office when we met, I myself was struggling. I myself, like my heart was hurt. Because I was like, did I make the right decision? Like, like you said, like I can naturally connect with people because people are my thing. I can't naturally connect with math. Okay. But I can naturally connect with people. I was called in the principal's office because this young man was, oh my, he was off the chain. He was cussing everybody out. And this was his normal thing. This was his normal, go-to, his normal defense, his normal deflection, so to speak, on talking about what really was going on. And I knew that. You can know that within, 2 seconds of sitting down and meeting a kid who is displaying these sorts of behaviors. So I sat down right next to him. I usually get a feel for people's energy before I get too close, because sometimes I will get in people's personal space, because then it does force them to focus on the here, the now, and reset them so that they can talk through what's going on. And I was like, okay, this kid's clearly agitated. Within like 1 second, he cussed me out. And my heart was already hurting, right? Like, I was like, oh man, like, I'm not even going to get this right. Like, here I am, like within like, it was like the second day on the job, like working with actual students during that time. And I was like, and this kid needs me, and I'm messing this up. Like, he's cussing me out. Like, and it's not that that had never happened before, but I think I wasn't as prepared as I felt like I could have been, because in my other district, I knew the kids, I knew the families, and I knew that if that happened, like, okay, we can work through this. I felt like really out of my element. And I just straight up looked at him and I just said, listen, like, I am feeling awful right now. And I was playing to his empathy. And I said, I am brand new here. This is my second day, but I've been doing this 10 years. And I'm feeling like crap right now, and you're not making me feel real good. And I think if I got him to stop, right? I got him to stop and look at me. And then he basically, continued on his rant, you know?
Yeah.
So I knew that in that moment that, I was never going to give up on him, but I wanted him to know that I was struggling too. And even though I knew that no matter what I said, it wasn't really gonna reach him in that moment. I sat there the whole time with him.
Mm.
I sat there with him while the principal came in and talked with him, while his mother came and picked him up. Um, and he walked across the stage a year ago, for graduation, which sometimes feels short of a miracle. I ain't gonna lie. Sometimes it feels short of a miracle, right?
Mm.
Including this one right here. And I will never forget, but he stopped after graduation. He stopped, when everybody's congregating after we all do our throwing our caps and stuff. And he stopped and he says, "Aren't you happy you'll never have to see me again, Mrs. Ryan?" And I looked at him, I won't say his name, but I said, "You know what? I hope I do see you again one day. I hope I do." And he just smiled and walked away. And I knew in that moment that I had made a connection somehow, because he had stopped specifically to say that to me.
Mm. So powerful. And that is something that has to be done with intention. Not everyone is going to put themselves out there in the way that you did. And I'm hoping that this is encouragement to anyone listening. I think the powerful thing that you did in that moment was that you showed this individual who you didn't have to, but you showed this individual that, hey, I see a human being, right? Everyone may see a label or may give you this thing or put you in this box, but I see a human being. And he felt that immediately to even listen to anything you had to say. And I think that's powerful. And we all can do that, right?
Yeah.
If we just allow ourselves to display that empathy and really feel that. So I love that you shared that. All right,
Mhm.
so
Thank you.
I want to wrap it up, and I want you to share with our listeners some resources, but then also maybe a book, a quote, an idea that you think will add value to listeners. But I'm going to share some national resources before you do that. So on the screen, if you are watching this, you can connect with Speaks to Inspire at www.speakstoinspire.com. From there, you can go to our resources page for local and national resources if you need that. And like we mentioned on previous episodes, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is 988, and you can call or text them if you need support. So please feel free to access that. in addition to the Unlearn the Lies About Mental Health Facebook group. So if you'd like to keep the conversation going with myself and other advocates across the country, join the group. We'd love to have you in there, and make sure that you're in a position to have resources, to share resources, because you never know who needs those. And the other thing is we get to hear a lot of inspirational stories in the group, so it's always cool to hear those as well. So, share with us, how can I want you to speak to maybe the student who is
Mm,
listening to this and they're interested in finding what resources are on their campus and even reaching out to this mental health support. How can they find their Mrs. Ryan? Like, how can they go about finding any resources that they have access to and probably just don't know they exist?
yeah. It's, it may seem kind of hard, but it's really not, because those people that are willing to help you are probably already in your life and you don't even know it. That could be a teacher that you connect with. It doesn't matter if that's on a college campus or in a high school. It could just be as simple as, asking to sit down with a professor, and just saying, like, hey, I'm going through some struggles. And a lot of times, those folks have tons of wisdom and life experience that they can help you with as well. And they can help you take it a step further if you need to, and get you connected with the mental health services on a campus or in a school system. That's what they do. And honestly, a lot of folks are really equipped to do that. So sometimes, even for myself, I don't have to look farther than just right down the hall, and go and talk and utilize resources. And those people that see me every single day, and talk through things, if you're looking for more, academic resources or things to help you on your campus, like I mentioned, I'm working collaboratively with the Kent State students in their Active Minds group, as well as my Active Minds group, high school and college together. So, Active Minds is a program, an organization that has a phenomenal resource opportunities for campuses and for students. And maybe that's something that you get passionate about, and you want to have your own chapter of Active Minds on your campus. A lot of times, like I said, just utilizing those folks that are right next door to you is important to do.
I love it. So I know that you mentioned there was a book that you had in mind, and I love that book. I probably read it twice so far. Share that
Yes.
book with us,
Yes.
and then
Okay.
maybe one or two takeaways from the book, which is why you like it so much.
So, number one, it's a really short book. It's phenomenal. So, it's written by Viktor Frankl, and I'm not sure if he's PhD or whatever, but he's the founding father of logotherapy. Which, okay, if anyone is a psych major or has any background in psychotherapy or things like that, they would know who Viktor Frankl is. So, Viktor Frankl wrote a book. He wrote a few books, but he wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And it was probably one of the first books that I read when I was really diving into the history of psychology. And it spoke volumes to me, because here you have this story of, like, when you think of like one of the worst things that have happened in more recent history in our world, I think of the Holocaust. Um, and it focuses on surviving and persevering as a Jewish person living through the Holocaust and finding meaning, hope, love through all of that. And to me, if you can survive that, um, you can survive anything. And it builds on grit and resilience. And that is something that, is really important to have. So it definitely speaks to me on a personal level, on a professional level. And Viktor Frankl was a cool dude.
Facts. I love it. I love that book. If you haven't read it yet, definitely check it out. I think it's a great read. So many gems in that book. So thanks for
Yes.
sharing, Emily.
Mhm.
So with that being said, I do want to wrap it up. This was an amazing conversation, and I had so much fun chatting with you. And
I
I'm sure this is going to bring so much value to our listeners. So again, this is the Unlearn the Lies About Mental Health, the podcast. And we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you.